1800s, like 1880s. So essentially, this strike happened in Atlanta, and at the time it was sort of during the Reconstruction period, so a lot of the women had just like lost their husbands during the Civil War, but they were able to finally get jobs that like paid them. So they made up about a third of the population of Atlanta, which is where the strike occurred at the time, and they felt that they were paid unfairly after quite some time how other people were being paid, as this was the first time with like a paying job, so they didn't really understand that. So then they decided to go on strike, and at first the government officials, like the mayor especially, didn't realize how like detrimental this would be to their economy. And they assumed that their wives, like these other women, would just take up their jobs and replace them, and that didn't happen because their wives like didn't want to work. They were like, what is this, like, we don't want to do that type of labor, like this is their job. And so then these men were like struggling, like how are we going to come up with this, like this is a service that we need and no one is willing to do it. And so the women were very civil about it. They wrote a letter to the mayor and they said, hey, we want to get a license so that we control, like we have a union, like we'll be able to control our prices that you have to pay us. And they would pay a yearly fee of $25, and that was very, very reasonable for the time. However, the mayor was very unhappy with it, and he didn't want to like lose this strike against them. And so they started arresting the women, and they figured that the strike would be over soon once they saw what they were doing to the other women, but it wasn't, and these women held out, and eventually the mayor ceded, and he was like, okay, you can have like this card thing that says that you can control your prices. And this was a huge success, not only for the women at the time, but for future women strikers, because these African American women were like the lowest on like society's totem pole. They had absolutely no power, and yet they were able to do this very powerful thing and achieve a lot. So it inspired a lot of future strikes, especially for women workers. So I did a musical piece on it, and in the beginning I sort of wanted to show like a bit more hopeful tones, because it was during the Reconstruction period. As I said before, they had just gotten their first paying jobs, and they were not upset about it at the time. And then near the end of like sort of first section, you can see like it sort of goes a little off, like they starting to realize how unfairly they're actually being treated. And then I sort of like have two contrasting voices in it, as with my earlier piece, but so you sort of hear like the low tones are meant to represent like the mayor and all his employees who were sort of fighting against these women. And then throughout the piece there's sort of like a reoccurring melody that is the like strong, persistent voices of these women. And near the end, not to like spoil too much, but these sort of like discordant between the voices, and it shows them like arguing more. And at the end, it doesn't really feel very finished, like it's a bit discordant still, but I sort of wanted it to be that way because in the end of the strike, like, yes, the women did get their way, however, there was still tensions between the two groups, so I sort of wanted to show how they were able to like live together peaceably, however, it wasn't perfect. So, yeah, try that. Just give me a minute.
Thank you.